Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. We're here with the author of The New Manager Mindset. His name is Bryan Armentrout, and Bryan is a 20-year veteran of the food manufacturing world. He leads the food safety, regulatory, and quality assurance functions at leading consumer packaged goods companies, and he's now the founder of the Food Leadership Group, which is a consulting firm specializing in helping FDA-regulated food companies produce safe and awesome food products. So we're going to jump in and find out a lot about food and business and the business of food and so many fun stories. So Bryan, glad to be speaking with you.
Awesome. Glad to be here, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. And as we were just saying moments ago, I live in California where we have a lot of agricultural food manufacturing, and there's always all kinds of like factories, plants, trucks. I just like drive by and I see some kind of names and brands. I'm like, oh yeah, there's like Purina over there and Mott's and just all these things that I haven't really until recent years given more than a second thought into just like all this work, all these systems that go on into making our food work.
Yeah, absolutely. We all eat, right? And it's kind of one of the things, Robert, that I would always tell people who work for me on my teams is that if we do our job well, nobody notices because you don't have recalls, you don't have illness events and things like this. I was explaining to my mom one time what I do because it's kind of a weird thing, right? I'm not a salesman. I'm not in marketing or things like this that people understand. I'm working in quality assurance and food safety. And the way I explained it to my mom was this way. My mom loved coffee and she could drink coffee at night, which to me was absolutely amazing. But she always had her cup of coffee with her. And I said, Mom, this is kind of what I do. It breaks down into two main buckets. The first bucket is quality assurance. And that is making sure that the company understands exactly what you want from that cup of coffee. So you pour it in the cup and the steam comes up and you've got that, you hold it up and you can smell it and you've got that nice aroma and you add your cream and it kind of billows up into the cup. And my mom is going, oh, yeah, I love that. I'm like, that's quality assurance. Making sure that as a consumer, you are happy and you will come back and buy again. And she's like, yeah. I said, the second part is even more important, and that's food safety. That when you drink that cup of coffee, it doesn't kill you. And she went, oh. And from that point on, Robert, my mom understood what I do.
Those two sides of the coin. And it's just, it hurts the brain to think of how many layers and how many different people and teams go into the sorts of things, because just when you hear about just, industrially, there's all sorts of materials, all sorts of containers, all sorts of trucks, all sorts of transportation. And it's scary to think that, one little bit of this in that container and it could potentially kill thousands of people. And then there's also that side of the quality assurance. And I didn't think about that too much until reading and narrating your book, because there's something about the potato chip, right? Like a potato chip, if it's too strong or it's too weak or it's the wrong texture, and we just take that for granted, how by the time it's on the shelves, it just kind of exists as is, but it probably went through there's so many, who knows how many years and iterations and just tweaking and getting the formula just right. And so it boggles my mind. And I don't even know how to wrap my head around it or where to even begin with this whole world. That seems like there's so much to it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those hidden things that we just all take for granted.
Well, okay. So what should we know about it then? As far as, you could attack it as far as what the public should know, or people in your industry should know, or more in bigger scope, what business people should know. But I mean, what do you feel just in any of those buckets, what does not get enough attention that you feel there should be?
Well, I mean, we can take this from a couple of different approaches. And so we'll take this from the consumer standpoint, Robert, is, okay, you're going out and you're eating and you're buying food at the grocery store and things like this. And what type of food should you avoid? We all hear about, oh, I'm a celiac and I can't eat gluten or things of this nature, or I'm allergic to peanuts. And so I avoid these type of foods and things like this that you see in the marketplace. Part of this, though, too, is thinking about this from a food safety standpoint. Certain foods are riskier than others, and they have a higher chance. Now, part of this always comes back to you as an individual. Now, you're a young guy and you're healthy. A lot of things probably aren't going to impact you. Now, think about your grandmother, right? She has to be a lot more careful about different things because different types of foods can cause illness much easier in people who are susceptible to it. So there have been things that have come up in recent years that we thought were pretty safe. And so you're out in the valley in California, huge produce area. We've seen amazing recalls with spinach and romaine lettuce and sprouts and other things like this. And we all grew up thinking, oh my goodness, these things are healthy and super good for you. How could there ever be any problems with these? Well, there are. And a lot of times you have to be very careful with foods such as those that are what we call in the industry ready to eat. So things where you take it home, you take the lettuce out of the bag, you throw it in a bowl, you put on some yummy dressing, and off you go. Well, whatever is on that lettuce, you're going to be ingesting and eating that, and that could make you sick. So I think part of this, and this is what I do in my practice and my business, is awareness and helping to communicate and teach people about these type of risks.
And I think there's just something to be said about just being mindful in general. Like, again, it wasn't even until more of the recent years that I never really looked at the label on food. I thought, oh, that's just being like too picky or too nerdy.
Yeah.
Like, even until maybe like the last 10 years, I didn't even know like really what a calorie was, right? When you saw like something like 100 calories or 500 calories, I was like, up until recently, I was like, oh, what's even that? And then when you hear about some of the marketing or the trends and fads that come about when they say like, oh, well, this is fat free, but then they add more like sodium or something. So then when you just look at it on the surface, then you're kind of fooled a little bit into thinking like, oh, this is all sorts of healthy stuff. But then when you drill deeper down, you're like, oh, well, there's more to it than that. And so speaking of food, like, is it just me, or does it seem like some food has become maybe a little like lazier or lower quality the last like 5 or so years? Like, it seems like just in general, like, you're mentioning the prepared foods, like TV dinners and things like that, or fast food, it's kind of like maybe a little worse than 5 or 10 years ago. And I think like maybe that's a good thing, because for someone like me, it's like pushing into more of the healthy stuff. But is there anything that you can say to that? Or am I crazy, or is this happening just as far as like the last 5 years or so? It feels like in some areas, like food qualities decline maybe like 20%.
Well, and this kind of gets back to, and that's a really good observation, my mother's love of coffee. So if, for example, that coffee company is under a lot of pressure, and let's say, for example, there's a lot of inflation going on and their profit margins are really getting cut, and they normally buy coffee beans from a high-end Colombian company that pays a premium for those beans. Now, let's say in that company, in this particular scenario, that the CEO comes to the procurement group and says, hey, listen, guys, we've got to cut some costs here. We're losing money on this coffee. And so the procurement guys are like, oh, geez, how do I fix this? So maybe they start going out and buying cheaper coffee beans, or they start blending in cheaper beans with the more expensive beans to get the price back in line. And now, as the consumer, you've been buying this coffee for years. And now all of a sudden you make that cup of coffee in the morning and you taste it and you're like, that's something's different, right? You're not quite sure what, because these type of changes, Robert, never occur in giant chunks. It's always a little bit at a time. And so over time, as a consumer, you're evaluating and judging that all the time. You're going to reach a point where you say, and this is exactly what you just said, there's something not right here. This isn't quite what I used to experience. This isn't what I remember. It's not as good. That's quality.
And it's so basically death by a thousand cuts. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you think about there's always a lot of like talk about like making a good quality product, right? In food or just in general. And it seems like there's kind of like a mind game to be played there, because it is tempting to like cut the costs and be realistic and be reasonable. And then, but then you aspire to kind of be like the Walt Disney of your industry, right? And to be the crazy dreamer and to be always chasing perfection. And so how do you balance that? How do you say, well, I want to make money, and there's like the supply chain, and there might be like inflation or suppliers change their prices. There's like the realism, but there's also that desire to want to be like the best at what you do. But then you're just like, well, am I being obsessive, or am I like being too hyper focused on the quality or improving the product at the expense of the rest of the business? I mean, do any of these sort of thoughts enter your head?
Oh, absolutely. And this is really the second section that I go into my book around this, is a lot of times companies get too internally focused, and they forget that the reason that they're there is to provide the product and service to make the consumer happy. And figuring out and understanding what that is critical. Because if that company, in my coffee example, doesn't understand with what you as the consumer are looking for, and then protecting that, they're into all kinds of risks because, as we all know within companies, Robert, people change roles and move around all the time. And the person who was there when that company started as CEO probably isn't there any longer. And maybe that vision of what they were looking for has changed. And within companies, who generally becomes the chief executive officer within a company? It's normally sales or marketing or maybe finance. It's very rarely operations or quality assurance or these type of groups. They're coming in and they may not even understand. So let's say that the CEO coming in used to work in automotive and now he's the CEO of a coffee company. He doesn't even understand at that point in time what the consumer is looking for. So I think a lot of times, to answer your question, is what happens is companies get disconnected from what the consumer is looking for. So what I do within companies on that quality assurance side is try to bring them back to that reality and say, hold on a minute here. Is the consumer going to like this or not? Yeah, but we got to cut costs. Well, if the consumers don't buy it, none of that matters, right? We have to make sure that our consumers are happy first and that we understand what it is that they want, right? So your expectations as a consumer are very different when you go to lunch at McDonald's versus Ruth Chris for a steak on that special occasion. You have different expectations, and the companies need to understand that and meet your needs.
I love it. So it's like to getting that connection back with the consumer. And you mentioned about what they want and what makes them happy. And so that way they can become a factor once again. And then in your book, you mentioned it a few times already here, of just that whole where the disaster doesn't happen overnight, right? And then you end up kind of this long path of, at first it seems harmless, but then the next thing you know, now that connection with that consumer has been severed, and now there's a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of claw back and maybe in some cases like save the brand, save the company. And so, do you have any like fun stories about this? Like when you came in and like things were not that ideal, and you said, "Hey, I'm Bryan. This is the new manager mindset. I have this new way of thinking," and you kind of fix things up. I mean, what sort of stories do you have to share?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. Well, let's take one from our headlines right now. Is giant marketing missteps. We see these in the marketplace. There's a recent one with a very large beer company that hired a public spokesperson that the market didn't resonate with. So the company thought that, okay, we'll bring on this high energy spokesperson and the consumers are going to love it. Completely the opposite of what was expected, right? So pretty much a brand that has been around for what, 50 plus years is now in danger of going out of, I don't know, not necessarily going out of business, but they've lost incredible market share because they failed to understand the messaging of what their consumers expect from their brand. And those type of mistakes can be catastrophic. Now, you generally don't see those very often. Back to our point is quality is generally eroded in very small steps. And we see this all the time in the marketplace. Especially with high-end products. So ice creams or things like this. Think of like these really fancy ice creams that you have in the grocery store. And if they start substituting ingredients or they start getting a chocolate chip in there that's a little less quality and things like this, over time, that experience changes. Because part of this is we don't necessarily buy these products all the time. So if you're buying ice cream, that's an indulgence. And let's say that maybe you buy ice cream twice a year. You're going to get some for Thanksgiving and maybe some in the summer to celebrate your birthday or what have you. But those points in time, you go back to your reference. And during that period in between that, those changes occurred. And the longer that time frame in between, the greater your variance that expectation is going to be. And you're going to notice right away. And so part of this too, as consumers, Robert, if we have a problem with a product, we're going to taste it and go, that's garbage. I don't like that at all. And you just quit buying it. And how many people actually take the time to complain? Very few. I think it's less than 10%, if that, will complain about a serious issue. Most people just change. They'll go to something else. It's like, okay, I'm not going to buy this brand of ice cream anymore. I'll try my luck with another brand. Now, all of a sudden, sales start going down and profit starts being eaten into. And companies try and find more ways to cut costs, right? And this cycle just continues. And pretty soon, it's no longer in the market.
That's a scary place to be, just focusing on the numbers too much there. And then and it's interesting too, dive into that psychology there and like you're making me think about some of my own buying decisions. Just that, like, you're so right that there's some foods are just like special occasion indulgence. And then if it's something where like you buy it like twice a year on your birthday, the expectations are a little bit heightened, right? Because it's just not an everyday purchase. And then if I have it once on my birthday, I'm just like, this is not quite what I remember it tasting like. And then I don't go there again. And then there's some of those foods where like you haven't had them in like years or decades. Like I was just thinking the other day that like my son's 3 and my wife was asking like, well, what foods did I have when I was 3? And I was thinking like, I don't think I've had like Nilla wafers in like 35 years. And I'm just like, I'm afraid to try them because I'm like, what if they don't taste like the good old days? So there's even like those, like the childhood foods or like the childhood candies that they're still there, but you don't always jump into them because you're not a kid. And like the expectations are like really heightened because you have that nostalgia factor. And then, but then also I can also relate to what you said there, where if it's not quite right, I feel like a whiny crybaby if I complain. Like, what am I gonna like go to the website and call the customer support hotline for like Snickers or something? Like, no, I would move on. So yeah, there's like so many obstacles there in that the expectations are high, but then also the feedback is low. So that seems like a lot of things to navigate there. And so I also want to make sure to touch on, you mentioned in your kind of pre-podcast questions here, mentioning like AI, artificial intelligence. And that's always exciting, but also sometimes hard to follow, especially because someone such with AI and like crunching the big data, sometimes it feels like magic. So what sorts of innovations or what's happening with AI as far as this quality assurance and this food safety?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we're just starting to scratch the surface on the potential for what artificial intelligence can do. And there's already some amazing things. I recently read about the country of Dubai is using artificial intelligence in their auditing and in their food programs for their restaurants. So normally, right, cities and groups have auditors who will go into restaurants, right? You see these scores on the outside of restaurants, right? This restaurant gets an A or what have you for their hygiene. You have auditors that are going into those restaurants and saying, oh, okay, are the people washing their hands when they're in the restaurant serving you? Are they putting the right chemicals in the dishwasher machine to make sure that the dishes are being cleaned correctly? Are they separating the raw food from the finished food? Again, ready to eat, right? Not cross-contaminating. All these type of things. That's just a snapshot. And that's one of the problems with auditing programs, Robert, is that it's only good for that point in time that I'm there. Right. So let's say, for example, you're running a restaurant and I'm the state inspector coming in to evaluate you, and you know that I'm coming. You're going to do a really good job, right? You're going to make sure your restaurant is nice and clean. All the employees are all buttoned up and looking pretty. And you're going to put your best foot forward for that audit. And after I leave, you're going to be like, okay, good. Glad that's over. Go back to normal, right? And maybe your practices aren't quite that good. Because a lot of times we're in restaurants as consumers. I love the restaurants where it's open, right? And you can see the cooks back there preparing the food and you can see what they're doing. The ones where it's kind of behind that door, you're kind of like, oh, what's going on back there? Now with AI, imagine, if you will, a system that allows for continuous monitoring. So you have temperature probes on the refrigerators and the AI is monitoring those all the time. It's not a guy on a clipboard going around checking the temperature twice a day. It's AI continuously monitoring that and also then looking at that and saying, ooh, that temperature on that fridge is starting to go up. I need to let somebody know so they can get a repairman in. Or let's say AI just calls the repairman themselves and the repairman shows up and fixes it. Or AI is watching the hand sink and you have a camera there that's watching and making sure that people are washing their hands correctly and then giving a report to the manager. Or food sitting on the counter. How long is that sitting there? Is that safe or not? Because the longer it's sitting out, the more bacteria that can grow and things like this. All of these type of things, right? The potential for AI in food manufacturing, restaurant, food service, all these type of things is amazing. It's absolutely mind-boggling what's going on.
I like your thought process. And especially it seems like so many times when there's like a new technology or AI, you worry that it will add to the complexity, that it'll make things harder. But I like how you're kind of like brainstorming here. It's like it'll actually make things easier because it's checking all these things that it might have taken multiple people or all these clipboards to track if it just can all happen automatically.
Right, exactly.
Well, fun. And so what is in the future for you and for just kind of your career and your company and what you're doing?
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So part of this is, um, so I've been on both sides of the equation. So I worked, as you had mentioned in the beginning, in food manufacturing at large multi-billion-dollar companies, running quality assurance and food safety for those companies. And part of the challenge, Robert, is that information a lot of times is locked up inside of that company. So I can learn all kinds of things and all kinds of useful information, but it's not like I'm going to other companies and saying, hey, listen, I've got this really cool stuff I'm doing. Would you like to do it? Doesn't happen very much. There's not a lot of cross-pollination. So what's great about what I do now in consulting and working with companies and things like that is we can start sharing best practices and saying, oh, hey, here's a really good way to manage these type of things. Or here's a great way to train your employees so that that information really sticks with them. So I'm able to take my experience now and communicate that out broader, which I love.
And I can tell you love it. And so, with all of your consulting and your experiences and multiple lives and problems that you solve, would you say like you have like a number one tip or something like that? Because when I talk to, I've talked to like a handful of like sort of, I don't know what they call them, like food guys such as yourself. You're really dialed in, really high energy, attention to detail, and I always love to like tap into some of that energy. So like, what do you have to tell us about like? Do you have a number one tip as far as like staying high energy or staying attentive or like being the best person that you can be? Like, how do we do it? What's your number one tip?
I'll take this up to kind of the 30,000 foot level on this, Robert, is that this is a big challenge, and I talk about this quite a bit, is if you work in a technical field. So I'm a microbiologist, and you have engineers and microbiologists and computer science people, and all these technical people working in companies. We tend to be introverted people, and we tend to kind of do our own thing. And part of the way we look at things is, okay, if I'm going to be successful in my career, all I need to do is work really, really hard, and then people will notice, and I'll get promoted. Yay. But what we find out is that doesn't work, does it? I can't count the number of times that in my career I've looked around and you see someone promoted and you're like, how did that knucklehead get promoted over me? Oh my God, what am I doing wrong? I just need to work harder. No, that's not the answer. Part of what I teach and part of what I work on with technical people is, yes, the technical skills are very important. But as you kind of can see in this conversation that we're having, I'm communicating this information in a non-technical way. Right? You have to be able to communicate this information outside of your technical group. So as the head of quality assurance, I need to go and talk with the CEO and the head of marketing and the head of procurement and all these other groups within the company and persuade and explain to them what I'm talking about here. And that is a key attribute in everything that you do. And this is a truism no matter what you do within a company or whatever particular career path you choose, is that the skills that you're good at when you begin. So I was a really good microbiologist. I could get things done really fast. And then I got promoted. Those skills were no longer needed, right? Now I was leading people. And if you're going to succeed, you have to understand that piece. And the more successful you become, the more removed you become from those actual technical skills that you use to get there, which is kind of ironic, isn't it?
Right. The thing that was your origin story that got you your start will not serve you the further removed you get. But then you're saying that's why it's important to develop these other skills that such as leadership, such as persuasion, such as storytelling, and then to kind of maybe do it seems like there's like the deep recurring thinking involved, right? Like even when we first started talking, you were kind of just talking about like how you explain this to like your mom or like how explain this to your grandmother and like getting outside of the jargon and to be able to make it fun, but also make your point. That just seems like something that it might take many years or a lifetime of skill to figure out how to say, well, I do have these kind of work level skills, but the leadership and the manager skills are what I need to tap into now.
Exactly.
Well, fantastic. And so if someone was amazed and wowed by what you had to say today with your kind of food knowledge and, management knowledge and business knowledge, and they want to take that next step with you, they want to find out about your book and your show and your business and your consulting, what's a logical next step? Where should someone go?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to reach out to me, the easiest way is by email. So it's B Armentrout, ARmentrout at foodleadershipgroup.com. And yeah, that's a really long email, but that's the best way to get a hold of me. And just reach out. And if you have any questions, love to answer them.
Fantastic. Well, they call that like a micro commitment or something, right? If you can figure out how to spell the email just right, then you've earned your way in to get a reply from Bryan. And we'll spell that out one more time. We'll say that's BARMENTROUT at foodleadershipgroup.com. And so it's been wonderful to speak with you, Bryan, and find out about what you have going on and what these kind of unique insights you have. And so as we wrap up our conversation, it's always fun to end with like a favorite quote, moral, or lesson. So does anything come to mind as far as a favorite quote, moral, or lesson from you these days?
Yes, I'll give everybody an interview tip. So I have hired lots of people in my career. And there's always one question, Robert, that I always ask. And for your listeners, I suggest you think about this question and come up with your own answers for this. Because if you can't answer this, it's showing that you may not necessarily understand where you're going. And the question is this. So, Robert, as you look back on your life so far and all of your accomplishments, personal, professional, it doesn't really matter. What are the 3 top things that you're most proud of and why?
Ooh, do I have to answer that, or are you flipping this around on me, or is that just a thing to think about?
Well, I think that's a thing for anybody to think about. And I'm always surprised. I would guess over the course of my career, probably about 70% of the people I interview cannot answer that question.
Ooh.
So that to me implies that they're not being introspective. They're not looking back, and they may not necessarily have a plan of where they're going. And so that question is a really good starting point to help you determine whether or not you know where you're going. And also, more importantly, do you like where you're going? Because it's your life. You need to figure out where you want to take it.
I love that. Take that personal inventory, because if you don't, no one will do it for you. And then if you are adrift, then you will end up in a place where someone else wants you to be and not you. So that's very good advice to take that inventory of the top 3 things that you're most proud of. Did I say that right?
Absolutely. Perfect.
Well, fantastic. And so one of those top 3 things that you should be most proud of is how you're reaching out to Bryan to find out about food safety, to find out about being a better manager. And so you can do that by emailing Bryan at that email address that we provided. And thank you very much, Bryan, for showing up and giving us some fun stories and just being a cool person. I appreciate you.
Well, thanks, Robert. I really enjoyed it.